Sullivan. I am author of the novel Colosseum. And I thought it would be a good idea, Christine, since the topic this time was actually your idea. So I thought it would be a good idea for you to maybe talk a little bit why you came up with this topic, where you came up with the idea itself.
Okay. So the topic is why stories seed what's possible for better or for worse, and then how fiction can create the emotional architecture for cultural, political, and technological change. So I had heard the author Kim Stanley Robinson, who he's a sci-fi writer. He's written The Ministry for the Future, New York 2140, and a whole slew of different books. And he talked about how fiction writers have the opportunity to help not only create good books, but create books that give people, their readers, a feeling state, like the feeling about what is possible. And, possible with a different, maybe beneficial technology, with a different way of governing ourselves that can be helpful that we just don't have any conception about, and for things that can happen on a cultural, environmental, and other kinds of levels, because it's really easy to imagine a dystopian world. Like, we've have all kinds of dystopian sort of books, from The Handmaid's Tale to 1984, to these things that can help us imagine what bad things can happen. But we also, if we really want to create something different, we don't have as many stories that help to seed possibility for a future that could actually be helpful and good for us, because we're not wired that way. So as fiction writers, he was saying that we have a particular opportunity, and I mean, from his viewpoint, responsibility, to write stories that help people imagine what's possible in a good way, so that we can begin to develop the emotional architecture to create those things.
Is one way to understand the phrase feeling state, it sounds like inspiration. So you know how, I mean, you have an inspiring leader, somebody who comes along and basically like inspires a community of people to do something. John, Kennedy is like he's talked about that way. So many people who at this point are now kind of retiring from politics because it was so long ago. They'll say that Kennedy inspired them to get into politics, or Reagan, and a lot of those people again are retiring because this was so long ago. So by feeling state, it sounds like inspiration. Is that a good way to understand it, or?
I understand it a little differently than inspiration. I think inspiration is like, even if you're talking about Kennedy, he inspired us to go to the moon, right? But
Hmm.
until we actually landed on the moon, we didn't have this emotional foundation of, oh, we are spacefaring people who have landed on the moon. So a feeling state to me is less about the inspiration about the idea, and more about having that as our part of our lived experience. And one of the things with fiction, at least the way that I listen to it, or I actually am more audiobooks, so listen to it or even read it, is that I like that it sort of seeds different realities within me, so that as walking with the characters through a book, I can see how their world works, the world works, and have kind of a story element to it that seeds that possibility within me. So I think it's less about the inspiration of what is possible, where we can say, wow, yeah, we can get to the moon, let's work toward that. And more like, yeah, we've been to the moon, that's part of who we are. And so it is the feeling state of who we actually are, and what is possible on our real life experiential basis, more so than what is theoretical that we're being inspired to think about or do. At least
So
that's how it speaks to me.
okay, so let me okay. So now that you respond to the possibility of inspiration being the meaning, some of the things that you said sort of remind me of how after once Game of Thrones became a popular television show,
Hmm.
I was struck by how people in my life who loved the movie, who didn't read the novel, by the way, they
Uh-huh.
didn't read any of the novels, but they loved the TV show.
Uh-huh.
And I was struck by how some of these people don't pay any attention to politics, but they could tell you so many details about Westeros. So
Right.
if Westeros almost for them was like an actual place.
Hmm.
And they knew who ruled what, when, where,
Hmm.
how, like who succeeded that person, which countries
Yeah.
were allied with other countries. And so with feeling state, it almost sounds like what you're saying is in terms of you take an idea and you sort of
Hmm.
expound on it the way we do in fiction, where like we create these real places, or we create a complete coherent place
Hmm.
that's
Yeah.
coherent to some extent.
Yeah.
Just like what's the other word for Gotham City? When people say Gotham City, they have something specific in mind, and they're not necessarily talking about New York.
Right.
And so you take the idea and you make it real for people, even though the actual place never existed. It existed in the pages of these novels, or
Hmm.
the screen of these movies or whatever. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, similar to that. So that, once you build that story around a place, and I never actually saw the Game of Thrones TV. I got through 4.5 books and they killed off everybody I like, so I stopped reading. But I really enjoyed them while I was reading them until I didn't. But the same thing, like there's creating this world, and in this world where things are interacting in this world, people are living in this world, like the world makes sense for what it is.
Hmm.
And so for things like near future fiction, near future speculative fiction or sci-fi, things like that, where you're actually talking about a future world, whether it's 50 years in the future or 500 or 1,000 or whatever,
Hmm.
you're actually talking about the future in a way that people can resonate with in the moment.
Hmm.
And that's what I got from what he said and from what he writes, because he writes these kinds of novels where it's like seeding possibility and exploring, scenarios in which people experience different. Okay, some of them is like if New York 2140, New York is under like 30 feet of water or something like that. So everyone, so
Hmm.
it's now like a water world. And, so how does that work out? And then the Ministry for the Future is sort of a worldwide ministry for the future that helps to guide the future and all the problems and different things for that. But it kind of gives you ideas, like the scenario about New York being underwater is okay. So that's something people have talked about. How does that work? You kind of come into that like, oh, okay, so it may not be great, but these people have figured out a way to survive. Or a ministry for the future where the whole worldwide orientation has shifted from how it is now to something that is actually future oriented. And how do you create something worldwide that is actually thinking about the future as something that could be sculpted and created rather than just let it happen. So I don't know. I kind of got off topic on there, but
No,
um,
no, 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 no. You're on topic. I mean, my next question though is so you kind of presented this feeling state idea, or this
mhm,
feeling state that is established in a certain kind of fiction, as a contrast to dystopian novels.
correct.
Um, and so, what's an example? Can you give an example of a novel that does what you're describing, besides the author that you're quoting? Because it sounds like he does that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Is there anybody else that maybe some people might be familiar with? Where
That's hard because there are not people really doing much of this work. There is some people doing things with, I can't think off the top of my head, like cozy sci-fi. So sci-fi that's more along the lines of a cozy, where it sort of feels good and there's a little a mystery story and a human interest and that kind of stuff. So it's not the scary future stuff that we sometimes get. But I think it's a real lack of a real open place where we can do a lot more, because
mm,
I haven't really come across many things that I haven't come across any really. A little bit. What's his name? Neil Stevenson, I think, has done a little bit with some of his books that talk about the future and it not being quite like there's a critical incident, things go terribly wrong until they don't, and it's sort of a morality tale about the future, but it doesn't really seed. It seeds ideas. It doesn't necessarily seed feeling states, and I think it's something that's really missing in the sci-fi-ish and speculative fiction, near future type of literature, because there's not things that I've seen. Doesn't mean it's not out there. So if you're listening and you know some of these things, that would be terrific. The one thing I've been reading, John Mars, who does techno dystopia, but but techno dystopia to kind of get you to see the problems with AI and some of the cultural stuff. It's not quite as apocalyptic or dystopian. It sort of takes a particular piece of what's happening now and says all the things that can go wrong with it. And it's not apocalyptic and it's not as dystopian as things like the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of dystopian literature out there. But I do think it's an area that if people who are fiction writers are interested in creating a better world, that imagining other futures to give us ideas and feeling states about what might be possible and how we might be able to work together to create solutions is a real, open field right now to explore.
Well, what about Star Trek? Would Star Trek be an example of that? I mean, where you have this, you know, think about all of the money that would have to go into building the Enterprise, and
Hmm.
then you have this huge crew on this huge ship, and their only mission. I mean, Artemis is circumnavigating the moon right now, whereas the
Uh-huh.
Enterprise is basically sent out to the distant, you know, galaxy, and their only mission is to just basically like explore and find things. They're not.
Yeah, well, I think that it does for like space exploration. I mean, I like the Star Trek for space exploration to make it seem like we can just go and explore and meet other beings in other places and, help to solve problems and then the
Well, not well, not
Federation and all that stuff.
well,
But
not just we. Like a white guy is the captain.
yeah,
I don't really remember what Kirk's like ancestor. I mean, what his background is. I mean, the main
I
thing I
don't
remember
know.
out of his character is he's supposed to be kind of like, sort of adventurous, free thinking, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. You've got Scotty, in the
Right?
engineering
Yeah.
room. You've got McCoy as the doctor. You have Uhura
Hmm.
as the communications person. You've got I forget the guy's name, the Japanese guy, who was
Yeah.
I believe he was basically a pilot on the ship.
Okay.
So you have this international. I mean,
Hmm.
the intent was to make it an
Yeah.
international crew. So I mean, in a way, like when you talk about how a feeling state takes something that is an idea, but it creates this world that has its own coherence. Star
Hmm.
Trek has a certain coherence,
It does.
and
Yeah.
that coherence isn't just technology. And the other thing about the technology, um, because I'm thinking of another example that's not about feeling state, but the other thing about the technology is it's not primarily for military purposes.
Yeah. That was a huge thing with Star Trek.
That was a huge thing
Yeah.
about Star Trek, which
Yeah.
is an interest. It's interesting that it's an American
It
idea.
is, but that was the time when in America we were really trying to open up to a larger, larger group, larger story, a larger experience of America, and Star Trek was a good example of that. And they really did some interesting things with that, and I think that's why it might not have lasted long on TV, but it was a cult favorite. It still is. People still love it.
Oh yeah, I
But it's
love Star Trek.
also something that is a feeling state, and I like that idea that this international show, we're working together. I find it interesting that they had to put it on a spaceship because would that have worked on Earth? And
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
so.
to your point, I've heard actual scientists say that like we invested more in exploring at least the near space than
Mm-hmm.
we have in exploring the water. Like we don't know much about the planet Earth in terms of, like exploring the oceans. Most of
Yeah.
the Earth is
Yeah.
water, going very, very deep in the Earth, and we just kind of speculate about like the core and all that kind of stuff, but we don't actually know. you know? So
No,
to your
that's true.
point,
But what I was meaning with that one is really like if you were to take that cast and put them in an Earth scenario,
okay, yeah.
would that have worked as well? It's okay as a future thing, speculative, all of this kind of stuff. They're working together, they're exploring space. It's not about, some corporation getting it or a military thing. But that whole dynamic, if you'd have taken it and tried to put it in an Earth-based scenario, I don't think would have
Hmm.
worked as well. But it did see the
Hmm.
feeling state in terms of, wow, maybe space exploration, when we're there, we will be different people with different priorities and be able to work together in different ways. But similar to that, like if you were to take that idea and put it in a near future Earth based something where we could see, oh, wow, here are systems working together. Here are how people are working together. Here is how, we can create something that is not financialized in a way that actually supports humanity, like OpenAI was supposed to be and didn't end up turning out that way.
Right.
But if you create stories or series, and there's probably more in the way of series like this, but I'm not sure, um, that actually show what is possible for us in a near future scenario so that we can begin to identify with that. I mean, Star Trek inspired millions of people in a lot of different ways
Hmm.
for space exploration, for all kinds of stuff. But if we were to do that in stories land based, earth based in the future, that were not about everything falling apart, but about maybe and maybe it's post-apocalyptic, but not like a lot of the post-apocalyptic stuff out there now is like, everybody's dying of a disease and there's people with, they've mutated with knives in their hands. And, it's all very bleak.
I never
But
got
what
the
would happen
idea.
if we had
I never got
what?
the idea that Star Trek was post-apocalyptic. Like I always, I don't. I mean, it's been a
No, no,
while
no.
since.
I've moved from Star Trek to the other stuff out there now. Like,
Oh,
um,
okay, okay.
even if we went to something post-apocalyptic, everything post-apocalyptic or I mean, let's say post-collapse. And there are a little bit more things coming up post-collapse, like the society collapses and then what's next. To me, that's a really interesting place to go to with fiction. Not an apocalypse necessarily, because then you have to start from scratch, but a collapse gives you a different, usually you've got some systems in place post societal collapse in which you can build things. And there are people thinking about this on Substack in shorter fiction, some of
Hmm.
that, but I haven't really seen any longer fiction about what is next that is not um, mired in catastrophe and the 1% ruling everybody and everybody else is in chains and all that kind of stuff. Where's the hopeful stuff? Where are the stories that actually seed us creating solutions and being able to create something better after this mess has imploded?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know actually. I haven't run across that. I mean, it's interesting that you say 1% ruling everyone because, of course, that's kind of the premise of the Council of Nobles.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well,
it's,
I should talk about that because that the Council of Nobles and even Colosseum, they were both they're very direct intention kind of projects that really present a world in a particular way. So I've listened to Colosseum, which was really well done as an audiobook
thank
and
you.
a great story. And I've not really gotten as into the Council of Nobles as deeply. But why don't you talk about those two a little bit and what your intentions are with those two?
Well, I really appreciate we've already kind of established these two types of fiction where you have dystopian, and I agree with you. So dystopian, I wouldn't necessarily say is it is easy in a sense. It's kind of easy in the same way that when you have the threat of death in a story, well, the stakes are
Hmm.
going to be high. It's like, okay, so the stakes are high. So it is easy in that sense. And then
Hmm.
this feeling state thing, I mean, we're struggling to even find examples of it. That is a very compelling contrast to the dystopian idea. The type of novels that I really like, though, are novels where they're insightful, and so
Hmm.
it's not like what the novel is trying to do is it's trying to present uh, it's like a feeling state for a positive future after a collapse. That's not what these novels try to do. A lot of the novels
Hmm.
that I really
Hmm.
enjoy are novels
Right.
that kind of help you. They take place in a completely different time, but in being in another time, they help you understand the present better. Like there are two novels that I'm thinking of right off the
Hmm.
bat. One is Munich, um, which is about like the meeting that Chamberlain had with Hitler in Munich, and
Hmm.
is written from the point of view of two sort of administrative people. One guy, Hugh Leggett, which is an assistant to Chamberlain, and
Hmm.
he's younger than all the other people on the British side, um, and so he has a young family and everything. And there's another guy on in Germany at the time, and he Paul, and he's sort of kind of at the bottom too, but he speaks a bunch of different languages, and
Hmm.
he's friends with Hugh, and so you're able to see the British side and the German side from the point of view of a person whose whose take on it is kind of from the bottom. So
Hmm.
you're able to see everything, and it's just amazing with that novel how the way that Robert Harris sort of portrays the dynamics in Nazi Germany, and like there's this one moment where Paul is talking to this guy who was part of the SS, and Paul kind of has the attitude of Hitler's just bad for the country.
Hmm.
It's like he's proud of Germany. He's proud to be German. He's just like, we just got to get rid of this guy. In fact, he's part of a plot to try to murder him.
Hmm.
And he's on a train that's going to Munich, where this meeting between Chamberlain and Hitler's about to happen. And he's really getting to talk to this SS guy, like man to man. And at one point he says, like, what did you do before all this happened? This is what Powell asked the guy. And the guy was just like, well, I was a used car salesman. And then he kind of laughs and says, yeah, that's right. I didn't go to university like, you fellows, and I don't speak all the languages you speak and everything. You all messed it up and everything. And it's just fascinating how similar that is to like the situation that we're dealing with now, where you have people
Yeah.
who just have
Yeah.
this chip on their shoulder about like
Mhm.
basically the Enlightenment, about like being having a liberal arts education, about being
Right.
exposed to the world, about being open minded. He just has a chip
Yeah.
on their shoulder about that, and they're willing to literally like do these horrible things from that grievance.
Yeah.
Same thing. It's like,
Yeah.
almost 100 years later.
Yeah,
Same
there
thing.
are the parallels between now and then are just, I mean, glaring,
Yeah,
honestly,
it's
in
amazing.
so many
And
ways.
so that type of insight
Yeah.
into the dynamics of people, because I enjoy historical fiction, not
Hmm.
because I really consider myself to be a history buff, because
Hmm.
I tend not to care what the year is. I don't care what the year is. Don't tell me like who won what battle in what year. I don't really care. What I want to
Yeah.
know is what was happening on the ground during the
Hmm.
battles, what led up to it, what were the social dynamics. That's what I
Right.
actually want to know.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what I try to bring out in the Council of Nobles, and that's what I tried to bring out in Colosseum. And so with the Council of Nobles, the reason why you have this council is it just feels to me like that is a plausible as you say, after the cataclysm, which everybody seems to see coming. It's so strange how you have this train wreck and nobody can stop it.
I I know it's insane.
It's
Honestly,
insane. I watched the conversation between Heather Cox Richardson and John Stewart, and like they were just like, yeah, the cataclysm is coming. It's just like everybody sees it,
hmm
But like you said, what 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 are we going to have when the dust settles on the other side of this?
yeah,
And to me, the Council of
yeah,
Nobles, it's not. I don't really intend it to be dystopian, to tell you the truth. That's why I have characters who are very idealistic.
hmm
I have characters whose idealism is why they oppose the council. Not so much. They're not trying to make the case that we're not economically, stable now,
hmm
because the council is. You have these 13 guys managing regional economies in the United States of America. That's not the thing that they oppose. What they oppose is a movement away from the core ideals of liberal the core democratic ideals that we're used to, which
yeah,
is, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and we can build a diverse democratic system on the basis of that.
hmm
And so that's what their opposition is rooted in.
okay,
Now with Coliseum, it was the same sort of thing where the commercialism of the United States of America is reflected in a television show
hmm
where these former soldiers are using extremely advanced technology to basically do like a WWE sort of thing. I mean, they
yeah,
don't perform quite in the same sense because they have this armor on, but
yeah,
at the same time, they don't really expect anybody to be hurt. It took an extreme event for a person to be injured, and even then, the person was repaired
yeah,
essentially. Um, and so the commercializing something like that sort of represents one aspect or one problem in the United States of America,
hmm
and then connecting that to an ideology that is motivating a lot of what's going on right now,
right,
Christian
yeah,
nationalism. That's what I was trying to show, and how like you have all these everyday scenarios that are connected to those two
hmm
things. You don't normally think of them as being connected, but they actually are. And so like
oh
I
yeah,
said,
and you did
like
a really
that.
good job to know that.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Oh, I said you did a really good job connecting those dots. I mean, it was
Oh,
it
thank
was
you, thank you.
nicely done.
Yeah, thanks. So that's the kind of stuff. I mean, I'm producing the type of fiction that inspires me. Is
Right.
essentially what a short-winded way of saying that.
Yeah, and that's
uh,
like for me, and that's what inspires you. And I think that's really important too, because it's easy to be blind to what's happening around you. But when
mhm.
you have a book, whether it's historical or, near future or something that kind of shines a mirror on what's happening, you can connect dots you can't connect otherwise. I'm always really interested in about how systems work and how systems affect people and how people affect systems. So, and I'm really have been interested in, not the current mess that has its own trajectory, but what do we create from the current mess? Because there's all kinds of critical incidents that are happening every single day, but at some point, something's going to happen in which, we're going to have to make other choices. And so I'm really interested in pondering what those choices are and how we might get there, and the things that we can do. Because if you look even at places like Substack, you've got people with these wonderful ideas, often working in isolation and talking about them in a nonfiction sort of way, and small groups of communities kind of working together. But one of the things that fiction does is it creates stories that we can identify with, that can help bring some of these ideas to life in a way that a theoretical essay can't.
I
And
totally
that's
agree.
what I want
I
to read.
totally
Like,
agree.
I want to write it. I want to read it. Like, I've got my other novel coming out, which is still sort of a historicalish thing, and then I've got the YA series that I really want to get to. But there's
Hmm.
certain things that have to get done.
Right.
along the way. So, but I'm very excited about writing it. Very excited about reading more of that. I think it would be wonderful for people who are fiction writers to kind of look at a lot of these amazing things that are happening and maybe even talk to people and begin to create future scenarios in which some of those things are actually functioning so that we can see what a functioning world might look like and create and have great stories within it. Because I think that's
Well,
one of the problems. Like if you have a world that's working, what's the problem? But I think you can still have challenges and stories and issues even in systems that are basically functional.
well, I'm glad you said the last thing you said because I read the last the post that you made about self-reflection and self-discovery.
Hmm.
Um, and I totally agree. And I think that more and more people, I wasn't surprised because actually I saw your post because Substack told me that somebody liked, it said my post, but since
Hmm.
the conversation that you were actually referencing we were both listed as contributors, it turned out it was actually your post.
Hmm.
And so, but I saw that somebody liked it and I was like, oh, let me check it out. And so it brought me to, the last thing that you wrote on Substack and
Hmm.
posted in connection to one of our live streams. Um,
Yeah.
and I totally agree with it. Uh, and I think sometimes I feel like, you said that you're a fan of Star Trek. Did you actually watch Star Wars?
I did. So I'm not so much I mean, I like Star Trek. I'm not a Trekkie, so you can't
Okay.
ask me like all the different kinds of Star Trek that there
Well,
are. I couldn't tell you.
look,
But
I totally get you. I guess I'm more familiar with details because I spent more time, and these were my formative years,
yeah.
watching Star Trek. I watched the movie Star Wars, but what I'm
Hmm.
getting at is in if you remember, the Death Star
Yeah.
was kind of portrayed as almost like it looked like a planet, maybe a small
Yeah.
planet, maybe a
Yeah.
moon, but it looked like a
Uh-huh.
planet, right?
Yeah.
This weapon. And
Hmm.
so I was thinking about how if you can imagine the Death Star has 50 states,
Hmm.
and within those 50 states, there are multiple counties. And within each county, there are multiple cities. And in each city, there are multiple blocks. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a familiar setup for us, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the communities in the Death Star have schools and churches and, you know, um, they have hospitals and grocery stores and
Hmm.
everything. Um, the thing about that is these communities, you might have a subgroup. Like I've talked on all of our live streams about how it feels to me like the United States of America has these subgroups, like a civics subgroup, people
Hmm.
who feel and care about civics and pay
Right.
attention to it and talk about it and
Yeah.
maybe even have podcasts where they talk about it or whatever. But
Uh-huh.
that's not the dominant culture in America, civics. I
No.
mean,
Right.
most people are kind of in this civic subculture. They call most other people normies, which is a fascinating term to me
Hmm.
because it's like members of this civic subgroup describing everybody else, people who don't follow the things that they follow, as normal,
Hmm.
um, which is fascinating. So you have all these other subgroups, you have religious subgroups and so on. And so let's go back to the Death Star, where you have like these communities. There's going to be a subgroup that's fully aware that they live on a weapon
Hmm.
and that everybody else in the universe has to contend with this weapon but them.
Hmm.
And I guess the point that I'm trying to make is everybody else outside of this subgroup, they may have different reasons to do the self-reflection, to do self-discovery, to try to like figure out how to gain more meaning in their lives.
Hmm.
But since they're the only people in the galaxy
Hmm.
that don't have to worry about being blown to pieces by this
Uh-huh.
weapon because they live in it, they sort of are doing all of that within a system that is threatening everybody else.
Yeah.
And so even though you might have like a collapse or they might, confront some sort of cataclysm on the other side of it, unless somebody destroys the Death Star the way Luke Skywalker did with
Mhm.
his lucky shot, right? Unless somebody destroys the Death Star, that system will be there on the other side of the cataclysm. And of course, the Death Star is all it's a great metaphor for the industrial military complex of the United States of
Mhm.
America, of course. And
Right.
so it's like it's easy to see the industrial military complex being on the other side of the cataclysm, and yet the rest of us sort of struggling to kind of come to some sort of, self-fulfillment to deal, to collect ourselves, to deal with whatever the cataclysm, brings about. But you have this
All right.
system that's probably not going to go anywhere.
Well, and I'm more hopeful than you are. That because when I look out at the system as it is now, like you can already see, even within that, that there are potential, there are little collapses happening. And there, I mean, even if you look at a generational thing, so you and I are in the same basic generation, and we were sort of brought up still in the sort of American dream thing, and we're kind of in that place where we're later career, we should have some some of the American dream stuff, like a safe place to live, and some
Hmm.
savings and some of that kind of stuff. Well,
Hmm.
my friends who have kids in their 20s, who highly educated, can't get jobs, can't none of them have girlfriends or boyfriends, like all that demographic stuff that you hear about. This is a group of people growing up that have a completely different experience
That's
than we
right.
have.
Yeah.
And as them as a demographic, I mean, they're in their 20s, a lot of them are in their 30s, they're coming up through into their teens, not tweens. And they're going to start making some different decisions and create different systems. I mean, you look at the disruptive systems that we've already have, the disruption to, with Uber and Lyft, with apps and Airbnb. And I think as people are trying to figure out how to survive, because those things, a lot of those came out of the housing crisis out of 2008. And people needed a way to make money so they could rent a room out of their house. They could drive their Uber car. They can do Grubhub and stuff now. And I was listening to a thing today talking about how the lower paid jobs aren't being filled anymore by anybody because nobody wants to do the work, because it's much easier to drive for Uber or Grubhub when you want to and still have control of your life. If you're not going to get paid that much anyway, why would you
Hmm.
do it at a low paid grunt job where somebody's ruling your life when you can do it on your own time when you want to do it? And I
Right.
think there's going to be more and more disruption to that. And the whole over financialization and things in our systems are really pulling out the threads that are holding those systems together. So healthcare, education, all of these things, like they're all basically on the brink of scrambling to try to hold the systems in place. But at some point, now if we don't have the Affordable Care Act and you don't have people buying into that, the insurance market falls down. Right now, there was an announcement said, well, we can't support Medicare or Medicaid, or we can't support Americans because we have to fight these wars. So we're going to start pulling money out of the social safety nets to start funding this war of choice that we're in. And so that's going to begin to degrade things to the point that they're just gone. They're gone. So I do think that as some of those things fall and get reorganized, because they're going to have to get reorganized, that our collective way of organizing is going to have to change. A
So
lot of
so
the
it
Go ahead.
it sounds like what you're saying is that, because as a matter of fact, I was just listening to a podcast before we came on, and just almost as an aside, the Democratic Socialists of America was sort of mentioned as this positive alternative, and it sounds like what you're getting at is um, people coming into their 20s with all they have available is this gig economy. That's what you're talking
Mhm.
about with, like, Uber and Lyft and Grubhub and everything, um, and um, and no realistic expectation that they'll ever own a home unless they inherit the
Yeah,
money or
yeah,
inherit the house or inherit
yeah.
the house,
Over House, yeah.
and just all these other problems, and you have the prediction markets where Kelsey's CEO is talking
Yeah.
about, we basically want to monetize everything. So you can
Yes.
literally just bet on anything,
Mhm.
and you feel like there's going to be a huge backlash
I think
to
there will
those
be
types
a
of things.
reckoning. I
A
don't think it's a, I
reckoning.
think it is a reckoning. I think
Oh, okay.
and wreck in terms of reckoning too.
Okay. Okay.
Because when, if you look at um, the little fragile threads holding together so many of the things that have been financialized, so you look at the
Mm-hmm.
debt markets, right? So you've got something and they're leveraged out 10, 15 times with the same value
Oh,
structure.
yeah, 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 yeah,
So
exactly.
one little pull of that thread and that whole debt market thing falls. So what do this they call it
Oh,
private
private.
capitalization. Well, the private debt market. There's for
Mm-hmm.
people who could not, mostly businesses, and this is the thing
Mm-hmm.
that's like it goes mostly with businesses who can't get bank loans, and they're not big enough to basically run stock things, but they have gone to private capital. But then
Mm-hmm.
private capital then bundles those, is like the housing thing, bundles those together and sells it to another private capital thing that bundles those together, so it tells it to the private capital thing that bundles it and sells it to your retirement, um, as a retirement vehicle for
Mm-hmm.
cities, for states, for teachers unions and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when that original capital investment or capital value implodes somehow, all of the things that belong to it or extended from it also begin to collapse, just like the housing market.
Yeah,
So,
we
or
know
the
that. Yeah.
housing, the 2008 thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's happened in not just housing, but all over the economy. And so if things begin to crumble and fall, then that's a lot of things happening at one time where you're going to have to restructure in various ways. And let's see, you mentioned something else. Oh, the poly market,
Mm-hmm.
the prediction market things, between with AI and markets. This is the novel I want to read. This is totally dystopian, but I really want somebody to start, and this is actually happening in real life. Like, there was a bet made or a few bets made about when we were going to invade Iran. And so you have people who might have known that or might have instigated. So at what point do you have the prediction market and AI working together, not just only to decide what to bet on, but how do you initiate the sequence of events that cause what you've bet on to come to fruition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not the person to write that novel, but man, I really want to read it. So somebody write that and send it to me because I really want to read that. And that gives us a better understanding and feeling state of what some of these things can be because, you think about the poly market, or a lot of people will think about the poly market over here. Oh, it's just a way of betting and all of that. And then there's the politics over here and the finances over here, but it's all together in a poly market, and AI together pull all of those things into one giant catastrophe just waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. So yeah, I mean, I do have scenes like that in the Council of Nobles, but they're not
Oh,
going
good.
into the kinds of details that you're talking about. But
I
I'll
want a
send you the
big
links
juicy novel. I want a big juicy novel that talks about that. I really
about
do.
specifically about that. Huh? Okay, I got you.
I want the poly market, AI, the whole instigating of stuff, the reckoning about it, I want all of that. And a really good story too. And a good
Interesting.
narrator because I like audiobooks.
Okay, all right.
I'll put my order in to whoever wants to write that.
So, okay, well, in terms of, because it sounds like the YA novel that you described during our last live stream,
Hmm.
sort of it has at least an element, if I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken, of the feeling state that you started off talking about. Is that
yeah,
okay? So that
yeah,
is true. Okay.
yeah.
So what what is the feeling state specifically? Because we didn't talk about in terms of a feeling state. I kind of peppered you with a bunch of questions, sort of trying to poke holes and to
Which
see
is fine, that's just fine. But yeah,
to
so the
see how
feeling state, though, yeah,
uh-huh.
how the actual world worked and how to pull it apart so it couldn't work. Yes, I remember that. So the feeling state that I was really going for is, this is the year 25 of the new, human 2.0 or whatever.
Mm,
But it was really about a world that worked in a particular way. And then there was, you have the story that's set in that world, but a world in which, nation states don't really play much of a part. They still might be there, like in name only, maybe for the Olympics. I don't know, but they're not what's running the show. This is, what would it look and feel like if you had more of a collective reality and collective governing, collective self-governance. And how would that actually work? Because obviously we have governance now where even in democratic states, you can't really trust your leaders to represent what people want. They've actively trying to dismantle what people have asked for and voted for and have in their state constitutions and things.
mm,
So how do you create that? And that took a long time to try to figure out how that might work. But because and it really did take a lot of thought, and this was the thing that I went away with and why I like the feeling state idea, and why I think novelists are part of creating that, is because it's really hard to think outside of the systems that we have now. It's hard
mm.
to think outside of the monetary system, the corporate system, and the governance systems that we have. We can think about them differently, but if we were to start from a blank slate, how do you create something that is responsive and that is actually from the bottom up, that actually could use technology to improve the world and the lives of people and do this in a way where everybody has a say? And it took a long time to like, well, how would that work? I have no idea. And so I created a world in which it worked in a particular way, not because I think the world should work that way, but because it gives people an idea of like, oh, like if I can see a contrast between the life that I'm used to living and another kind of world that is operating in a different sense, like that contrast can give me ideas of understanding what's possible, and this new state can give me this feeling state in this new place, can give me this idea that there is actually something that is possible, that is within our grasp, that is not destructive. And
Now, now,
that
isn't collective self-governance one way to describe democratic socialism? Or
I think all of our isms are just like lipstick on a pig, honestly.
hmm,
um,
okay.
because they're all structured. They all talk about, oh, we need the validation of the people, blah blah blah. But then it's still, no matter who is doing it, what is entrenched in the system as we have it is government overreach and abuse of power and enriching yourself in your office, and the higher level politicians, not so much state politicians, but national politicians, that they operate in a different world than the rest of us do. I mean, Delta
Mm,
was the one that announced, oh yeah, you're going to have to stand in line now. We're not going to let you politicians just walk onto a plane. If everybody else has to stand in line at TSA for 6 hours, you do too. Because there's this other sort of class that we give them, that they're elevated above the rest of us for whatever reason. And so we end up with these top-down things, and they're making decisions that completely contrary to what, you look at the administration, completely contrary to what they promised, because it meets other ends. And so
well, it
it's
sounds
not actually responding to us. But I think the potential for that is the same through whatever ism you're talking about.
okay. Yeah, what you just described about how there always seems to be a class above, regardless of the ism that
Hmm.
you build the government on the basis of. It kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of how in Animal Farm, the pigs at first were basically to kind of rile everybody up. They said
Uh-huh.
4 feet good, 2 feet
Yeah.
bad, because
Yeah.
the men walked on 2 feet. And then once they had met with the humans,
Hmm.
the pigs started walking in 2 feet.
Yeah.
And so then they started saying 2 feet good, 4 feet bad.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at communism, which was supposed to be the ultimate, of, the people. It's all about the people. Well, it wasn't about the people. I mean, I was in Soviet Russia, and we all just stood in lines, and you could see who had cars and were being driven around with little flags on the cars, and
Mm.
who was standing in line and didn't have any way to get transportation here or there, or the apartments and the living conditions of people who were not part of the elite, and they didn't have the opportunity that we had in the United States to be able to try to work your way up to that, except to join the party and work within that ecosystem. And the
Actually,
same thing.
you're saying that reminds me that like, I've had conversations like this with people about like isms and
Mhm.
politics and governance and all that kind of stuff. But how many political systems have you actually experienced firsthand? So you said that you lived in Russia when it was
No, I didn't.
communist.
No, I traveled through there during the fall of the Soviet Union, so I saw the waning aspect of that. And I stayed in people's homes. I heard their stories. I got invited to this crazy dissident artist party. That was interesting.
I
Um,
bet.
and so I was able to hear people's individual stories with that. And to see those things. And then my friend growing up, my best friend growing up, her parents had immigrated from Latvia, during or right before or during or a little bit after, World War II. So they had no, they lived under the Soviet system. So it was after that.
Mhm.
So they had lots of stories about that, and I, grew up hearing those kinds of stories. So they're here. I've lived in like Japan, but they had a little different sort of thing. I haven't lived under a communism or a socialism. I've lived in various
Well, no, what I'm
flavors of.
saying is so there's whatever time you spent in Russia, there's time you
Mhm.
spent in Japan when you were
Yeah,
basically teaching English. You
yeah.
were in India for a while at one point.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, we just described three fairly different countries,
Uh-huh.
which have gone through different phases,
Yeah,
actually,
yeah,
at least especially Russia. Um,
yeah.
so your comment about the isms to me has a little bit more weight where it's like, well, I've actually seen what this
Uh-huh.
looks like. I'm not just being, because one thing that kind of turns me off when I'm talking to people about politics is when a person says, "Oh, they're all corrupt." Now, this is before now. I'm talking about like 10 years ago,
Yeah,
15 years
yeah.
ago, you'd run across that person if a conversation about politics came up, and what they would say is I just, oh, they're all corrupt, and it just seemed kind of to me like a lazy sort of like I don't really want to think about the different
Mhm.
positions that people have or the different ways that people are engaging with the political system. I'm just going to put a pox on all their houses,
Right.
which up until now was not fair. Now it's starting to feel a lot more fair because everybody does seem to be corrupt.
Well, there's that, but I think, anytime, to me, most bureaucracies, especially top-down bureaucracies, whether it's corporations or governments or something like that, once you
Mhm.
have a bureaucracy, the function of the bureaucracy, the actual operating function of the bureaucracy shapes and forms to perpetuate the bureaucracy. So it's not that it's nefarious necessarily, but once you have something that's working in a particular way and people have figured out how to optimize their experience within that particular way, they want to preserve that experience and preserve the status quo so that they can continue to function in that particular way. We're
Yeah,
just kind of seeing
I think
the
that's the point that Tolstoy was trying to make about
yeah,
bureaucracy. I believe
yeah.
so.
Well, and so you see that, like, we have there's a great quote, and I don't remember who said it, but it was somebody talking with a Russian who came to the United States, and he said, "Oh, it's what I really admire, or what I've noticed about, or whatever, is how good your government is at, um, what is the word I want? Oh, it just escaped me. Propaganda." And the American
Mm.
says, "Well, what propaganda?" You know? And so we have so absorbed our story, as until more recently, where now we're kind of arguing a little bit more against it, but so absorbed our story as and internalized it as sort of the beacon on the hill, that we don't really see that so much of it is a story about preserving power,
Mm,
you
yeah,
know. And
that's
that's
definitely
where
true.
in any ism you have, as soon as somebody gets in power who wants to really keep that power or expand their power, all of a sudden, the mechanisms begin to shift to actually perpetuate that power. And I'm not just talking about our current administration. This has been an
Hmm.
escalating thing in different
Yeah,
ways in
yeah.
different administrations for different reasons.
Hmm.
But now but now it's just like this is how we're working now, and so there's no hiding it, no apologies, no nothing. It's just like this is who we are now.
Well, the one thing that you know, I was sort of leading to and asking you questions about your YA novel and the world
Mhm.
that you're trying to build there was it just started to feel to me like, I mean, it's not like I have a problem with a happy society. I mean, a happy society would be great.
Right.
I was just like, okay, well, how would this work? How would this work? I mean, is it really possible to get there? But
Mhm.
one thing that it felt like is, and it made me wonder, is it possible to have a happy society and at the same time have extreme levels or a lot of complexity? So, does the society have to be simple in some sense of the word in order for the people in it to be happy? Like, as you start to add things to the society, add more complicated technologies, add, more levels of government, you just start adding things to it.
Mhm.
Does that invariably lead to less and less happiness? I guess is the thing that I'm wondering. Like
I don't know. I like not to think so. I like to think that if we have levels of technology that we use
mhm.
in ways that help to, increase, this is my personal, thing that I go back to with my YA novel, personal and collective well-being,
Mhm.
that as things get more complex, it doesn't become more oppressive. That gets more complex, but technology is able to help us manage that complexity because we're not using it to have power over anybody. We're using it as a way to just allow people to live lives in different ways. And it's interesting that we've had these rulings in the last couple of days about Facebook and YouTube and things like that. And the interesting thing is, and I tell this to people too, that the problem is that the algorithm, not
Right.
necessarily the platform. But
Yeah,
if you were to
exactly.
take something as big as Meta or YouTube and you were to optimize the algorithm for
Positivity.
maximizing well-being,
Hmm.
you could transform all kinds of stuff. Now, you might not have people doom scrolling, which is probably a good thing, but you would also, the things that you would optimize is you would have people actually trying to create content that optimizes or that matches that optimization for good, for well-being. So, right now it's all about how do we, create the most outrage? How do you get the most
Right, right, right.
stuff, and we optimize for that. But if you were to change, I mean, a simple change of the algorithm could change everything.
Well,
And
well, that's
so,
it. Well, that's exactly what I had in mind. In that, was it a live stream or I think it was our first live stream where I threw out an idea just to get your feedback on it,
mhm,
and it was about how, I started off the end point. My end point was people are doing exactly what you just described, where
mhm,
people are encouraged. They want to record
mhm,
themselves
yeah,
stating what their values are in values as virtues, not
mhm,
vices, but
right,
virtues. And they
mhm,
wanted to do that. And then I started at that end point and I was like, to get there, I believe this is a system that would produce that. But basically, that end point is exactly what I had in mind, like you said, where people, instead of I mean, in a way, we are sort of encouraged to do that because people, if you post a picture of your dog or your cat, you're
Hmm.
going to get a lot more engagement. You're just going to because
Yeah.
people love dogs and they love cats.
Right. And that's a
You
particular
know,
kind of engagement. But a
I,
lot
I
of this
agree.
stuff
I agree.
that, is the addictive thing. And the addictive aspect of it is that it keeps triggering this same biochemistry in your body,
Hmm.
and if
Hmm.
you're addicted to anger, you're going to keep scrolling for things that make you angry. But one of the things that we are have a harder time with is sustaining positivity and good moods. So
And
if you were,
that's what I was trying to describe,
yeah,
basically.
okay. So, and I guess I didn't quite get what you were moving toward with that one, but if you just a simple switch of the algorithm, and so when people
Hmm.
ask, well, how would this happen? I'm like, you just switch all the algorithms, and we're all technologically connected. If everybody were to switch the algorithms to something that was actually helpful and supportive of mutual well-being and mutual thriving, we could change the world in a matter of a few years.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I mean, we're at 4 o'clock now, so I think that's a
Okay,
great place to.
next conversation.
That's a great place to end our conversation. So, thank you for everyone for hanging with us while we discuss these things. We meet every 2 weeks, so we'll be meeting again 2 weeks from now on Friday at 3 o'clock.